next few episodes of Renovating Faith are going to deal with some very intense topics, and we want to go ahead and give everyone a warning. If there are younger ears, you may want to wait till later to watch this. You yourself may need to take breaks during some of these conversations, so please be aware of that. And I hope these episodes are an encouragement and a blessing to you, but we are going to be dealing with some tougher things, and I just want you to be aware of that. Thanks. Welcome back to Renovating Faith. This is our first episode of 2025. 2024 was an interesting year for us, and a lot of changes, a lot of things happening. I took a week off for New Year's, and that turned into a month off, which turned into just a lot of different stuff, and a job change, a church change, a lot of changes for our family. And then of course I'll do a separate announcement on this, but we do have an announcement on the podcast. If you tuned into the alternate media live a couple of weeks ago, then you would have seen that. But I'll do a quick update video and post that later on. But we've got some cool things coming this year. I'm excited about it. But we're gonna actually work before we do the new stuff on wrapping up some old projects that have stretched on for a long time. So Anna came on in 2023 and shared her story with us, and then came on again in 2024, and we did a two-part episode on some parenting and a couple different articles, and we're going to continue that. There's just some. My wife's printing. She knows I'm recording, and she's printing. She just texted. She goes, "Sorry, I forgot." I should say something smart back. Come on in. No, hey, she needs to get your paper. I'm recording, but grab Mama's paper that she sent and printed. Nope, it's on the printer. I don't need a Reese's, thank you. I'm on camera. I don't need chocolate in my teeth. That, and I've already had a zebra cake tonight. All right, close the door, please. Thank you. I love you. All right. Oh, I feel like we should just go from the top on that one.
Right.
All right, here we go. See if I. There we go. That's better. Well, welcome back to Renovating Faith, and happy 2025. 2024 was an interesting year for us. We started off with a week off for New Year's, and then that turned into a month, which turned into some fun announcements, and then a lot of quiet time. And I had a new job, and my family started going to a new church, and just lots of new things happening. And then we've got a couple big announcements for 2025, but I'm going to save those for I'll do an announcement video a little bit later. But right now, we want to welcome back Anna D. And Anna came on in 2023. She's one of the first people to do her story with us. And she shared her testimony and how God had brought her through some honestly horrific things. And then in 2024, she came back and she said, "Hey, I would love to do this series on parenting." And we got halfway through it, and then again things got crazy. So before we move into our 2025 plan and the changes that we're making on the show, we're going to wrap up some of these series, because I think it's kind of important to do these and to finish what we started before we try to bust into some things I'm really excited about. But Anna's been basically a supporter of the show since the beginning. She'll message and just honestly always just been very, very kind and gracious and exciting and bringing ideas. So, Anna, welcome back to Renovating Faith. And last time you were on, we did a response to the Gospel Coalition, I believe,
Yep,
and
we did.
an article that they did on gentle parenting. And today we're going to do a response to, honestly, one of the worst books. Now, I have not read the book. I have seen enough reviews and quotes from the book that I have no desire to read the book. But we're going to do a little bit of a response. A lot of atheists have responded to this, and I think Christianity needs to respond to it as well. Michael and Debi Pearl's To Train Up a Child is celebrating its 30th year in publishing. I did not buy the book. I did not want to give the money. The things discussed in this book and how to go about child rearing are absolutely atrocious. So, Anna, why don't you just kick it off, and you can give us a life update, anything that you want to share, and then just Start on in.
All right. I would say so. Let's see, before my brain goes. I would say so. I haven't reread the book. My mother-in-law did give it to me because she was going through her books and she's like, "Oh yeah, I remember you talking about this book." So then I do have it in my library. I haven't reread it like the whole book because I would get really mad and just start ripping out pages. But I would say the big thing for me for an update would be that I'm kind of more detangling a lot of things that I used to believe
Sure.
or that my parents taught us to believe as kids. And so it's kind of that thing of like, now that I'm a parent, now that I'm a mom to a toddler, and I'm like, it's kind of that thing of trying to piece together more of a like cohesive thought process of what I want to do with my toddler and like what my husband and I have decided to do with parenting. So it's a thing of like throwing out the old trash with the last year of like just trying to like just kind of toss it out, but then also like critically knowing why I'm tossing it out. I think that's the thing is my brain a lot of times just wants to spring load it, like just like, okay, I'm just gonna dump this all out. And I'm like, yes, but I should also go through why I'm dumping
Yeah,
it out. And so I'm kind of critically
absolutely.
taking it apart in my brain and kind of like, okay, even if though it's making me really mad,
Yeah.
it's kind of helping me know like I won't go back into that route or like going into that old thinking again,
Yeah.
but with my kid. I've kind of been mentally going through those things of like, yes, no. Like, so it's a lot of like just mentally untangling stuff.
Yeah.
So
And you were just for those who haven't seen the episode with your testimony, you were pretty much raised under the Pearls teaching, correct?
yeah, I would say
So,
so. Yeah.
I know that they're not in the IBLP like with Bill Gothard and all of that, but they're kind of adjacent, correct? Kind of like running parallel to. Would that be the
I
right?
would say so, yeah.
Okay. Um,
And I think the Duggar family used some of the Pearls resources. I'm not sure. I didn't watch a lot of their shows growing up too, so I don't know if they used a whole lot. I know they used like we'll talk about more in depth later, but there's one that the Duggars used a lot that the Pearls used. It's called blanket training that we'll talk more about, but like that one I did read that they did use a lot. So I don't know how much that is kind of
yeah.
tangled up into each other about that. I don't know. That's the only one I know of, but I know that the Duggars used quite a bit, but I don't know how much exactly.
From what I know of the IBLP, which is mostly what I've seen from the Duggar exposés, um, and some other testimonies from like the Recovering Fundamentalist podcast did a couple things on them. And then from what I've seen that you've sent me on the pearls, that they're very, very similar. So if you know about the what the Duggars brought people up, how that went, or the Bill Gothard and his conferences and all of those things, if you're not familiar with Mike and Debbie Pearl, just you can pretty much lump them in with those guys. It's a lot of insanity. It's a lot of twisting of scripture, and we're going to address some of that. Do you want to go ahead and kick off where the note you put on in our notes
Yeah, I can do that.
kind of started that off, so I thought you might want to read that.
Yeah. So I kind of did some bullet points. So yeah, I feel like I did look into their like Michael and Debi Pearl's blog. So they have the blog and then they also have a newsletter they still send out. Like that is a physical newsletter. And I noticed that they kind of are backtracking a little bit on what they used to teach, but not a whole lot. It's kind of that thing of like, we don't really believe this anymore, but it's kind of this thing of like, it sounds like a lot of their thinking is still what it used to be, like what their books and like their audios and all of that are we're still preaching. So it's that kind of thing of they might claim they're not doing what they used to do with the old stuff, but I'm like, I feel like the new stuff is kind of still very heavily influenced by
To
the
put it in
Orthodox.
perspective, and we're going to get into some quotes pretty soon here, but um, the you had sent me a couple videos, and I really didn't want to share them. Not that the videos were bad, just
Yeah,
um, there were a really strong and a very well done. I don't want to say it wasn't well done, atheist
yeah,
response to some of this. But on the flip side, I didn't want to have to say, well, I agree with her response to the pearls, but I disagree with her reaction and constantly having to play
yeah.
this middle ground. So, but she shared a very in-depth, it was like a 4 hour video or something like that. Um, Quotes from their Facebook page, like things that are current, things that the Pearl's son is now doing with his kids, the grandkids that you know the teaching hasn't changed. Whether the methods have it all is minimal, because it's the teaching and the principles behind it that are driving these methods that really do turn into I don't know what I can say on social media. Um,
I feel like it's a toxic teaching.
yeah,
I don't know.
it's
It's
very
kind of hard
toxic.
to say if it's a
Board,
fully abusive
yeah.
because that's such a divisive word, but I call it toxic in my brain.
Yeah, and well, and we'll get into. I do believe it is abusive. Again, I'm not caught up on I'm not a monetized channel, so it really doesn't matter. We can say what we want. I don't want to get this
Right.
down because I do think people need to see it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it pushes even if you use their methods and don't cross these lines.
Yeah.
Okay, and I don't want to use the slippery slope fallacy, but you are playing a very dangerous game. And now, one thing that you put in their notes that I want to highlight is that the Pearls books promise their Christian parent readers that if they follow the principles that the Pearls lay out in their books and their ministry, that these parents would have obedient, happy, and well-behaved children. And from what I'm seeing of the people coming out of this, they're either caught up in the same cult or they are running from God. Like it's
Yeah.
very rare to have someone leave and stay in Christianity and just find a better version of Christianity. Because a lot of and I was even updating notes today and I read a couple things and I'm like, this is setting yourself up for some really, really hard battles in the future. And we'll get into that. I don't want to jump ahead, but I do want to warn everybody. Um, we are going to be discussing some really harsh things. We're going to be discussing sin nature, corporal punishment, abuse. And I know we had the warning earlier after the introduction, but I just want to reiterate one, you probably don't want your children hearing what's being said. Um, Two, we want to clearly state that this does not represent these teachings. Let me put it that way. Do not represent the biblical model of what child rearing should look like. Um, uh, Unfortunately, this model has gained a lot of influence in the secular world as to what Christians believe because a very small minority of Christians are very loud and vocal and hurt people tend to be the loudest in response. So when you have a very harsh and vocal group doing these things to children and those children leave, they're going to go the far way and they're going to be the loudest about how wrong it is. And in turn, they're kind of pretty much dragging Christianity down. What we want to do is show that there is a biblical answer to some of these claims, that there is a better answer to a lot of these claims, and one, there's an answer that first and foremost actually honors God a lot better than what these teachings do. Um, so, a little bit of background on the book. To Train Up a Child is a 1994 parenting advice book written and self-published by the Independent Baptists Michael and Debi Pearl. Michael Pearl was born in 1945 as an American Independent Baptist preacher and author. Michael married Debi Pearl in 1971, and together they wrote To Train Up a Child, which they self-published in 94. The Pearls have 5 children. Michael and Debi Pearl's teachings on physical child discipline were endorsed by the Institute in Basic Life Principles. Their ministry is called No Greater Joy Ministries, is the Pearls nonprofit organization, and that's a spin-off of the Bible verse. I have no greater joy than to know that my children walk in truth. The organization brings in between 1.5 and 1.7 million dollars a year through product sales, donations, and has sold or donated over 1.5 million copies of the Pearls books, CDs, DVDs, and other materials. The Pearls state that they do not receive royalties from their sales and that the profits are used for ministry purposes. There is a change.org position that Amazon refused to carry books which advocate the physical abuse of children, which mentions to train up a child by name. And this petition has received more than 100,000 signatures as of 2011. As of May 2024, the book is still for sale on Amazon in spite of Amazon's stated policy not to carry books that promote child abuse. And then I have a link that I'll probably share if you're interested in reading the book. You can read it online for free. But again, I'm not going to ask anyone or suggest that anyone buys it or anything like that. So here's the definition of what child obedience training is according to Michael and Debi Pearl. So they have the full verse: train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. And what they mean by that is you need to be actively involved in disciplining your children and being proactive. Okay. So we're going to go through a few things. They talk about setting up circumstances for your child, knowing your child will fail, and then beating them for failing. And I'm going to use the word beating because when you look at his definition of what a spanking is, it's beyond the needed. Like, I'm not against spanking. I was spanked. I have no issues with it if done correctly. And of course, everyone has their definition of what correctly is. But most people that I know who have a decent common sense about them and believe in a more grace-based parenting and where you still do discipline would agree that this crosses the line. All right. And we'll get into that. So before we go too far, though, I want to establish some definitions, okay? Because what Michael Pearl will do is he'll say, well, we're not punishing them, we're disciplining them. And we talked a little bit about this in our Gospel Coalition article that discipline is positive and negative. Okay, discipline, me getting myself out of bed every morning is being disciplined or disciplining myself. Me waking up to an alarm is disciplining myself to do things regimentally on a daily basis consistently. That's discipline. Discipline is not negative. Discipline is reinforcing the good. It's guiding. I often look at like positive discipline this way. When I was 11, my dad gave me a jigsaw. Actually, I think my grandma gave me the jigsaw. My dad started teaching me how to use one, and my dad would guide me. And he might give me verbal instruction on what I'm doing right, wrong, saying, hey, you're getting a little inside the line. Or he may take his hands, put them on my hands. So if I'm holding the trigger like this, I've got my hand on the front, I'm guiding the saw. He would put one hand here and one hand here and guide my hands. Okay, that's discipline. That is directing the path that my hand should go and training me how to use the saw, right? Same thing with basketball. Okay, my dad was my basketball coach. And he'd sit there and say, hey, okay, shoot some free throws. All right, your elbow's too far out. Hey, you're shooting too flat. He was training, he's guiding. Now, sure, I mouth off, I goof off, or, miss 3 out of 10 free throws, and you got to run some laps, things like that. There can be a consequential side used in discipline, right? So we want to make sure that one, training involves discipline, it involves structure, it involves guidance, it involves conversations, and it involves things like teaching, right? One thing that we've used that my wife came up with is teaching our children to ground themselves, okay? When my daughters have what we call big feelings because a 2-year-old doesn't understand what a tantrum is, get down on her level, look her in the eyes, grab her hands, and say, breathe. Teach her how to work through that emotion. Don't just beat the emotion out of her. Okay. So that's part of training. That's part of discipline. I teach my children consequences. Good actions get good consequences. Bad actions get bad consequences. And we've just gotten into that very recently with my 2-year-old, to where I said one time, I was like, I forget what it was. I needed her to eat her dinner, and she really wanted a popsicle. So I said, okay, yes, chicken. Yes, popsicle. No chicken, no popsicle, right? Got to put it where a 2-year-old can understand it. Like a week later, my in-laws come over on Wednesday for dinner before we go to church, and we're having taco bake, I think, which is like it's basically like a taco casserole. It's delicious. I love it. Um, and my mother-in-law had brought Oreos over, and out of the blue, my 2-year-old goes, "Yes, taco bake. Yes, Oreos. No taco bake. No Oreos." We didn't make that promise. She just took the concept and ran with it. So she's understanding cause and effect, and then she ate all her taco bake. So I want to kind of point out that we need to understand that words have definitions, and you have to use them that way. Anything you'd like to add to that?
I think yeah, it's just the putting that back into the context,
Mm,
especially with a lot of the verses that the pearls use, like kind of putting those
yeah.
verses that are great verses, but to like put them back into
Yeah.
context because a lot of times the pearls take them out of their context and then they
Absolutely.
kind of squeeze it, twist it, whatever they want to do with it to make it their own, but also not really having that biblical foundation.
Yeah.
I think that's what's really important to
So this
remember.
absolutely. And the standard definition, I'm going to quote the verse and then I'll tell you the standard understanding that Christians tend to have of this verse. And then we're actually going to go through what the verse actually says. All right. And I meant to pull this clip the week that my pastor did this, like 2 weeks before Christmas or something like that. Sometime, I think it was in December. And I meant to pull it and I didn't. And now it's probably gone forever. My pastor actually gave the correct understanding of to train up a child. And I was like, oh, I wish I could pull this in and use it on the show. So the verse is train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. And what most Christians understand this to mean is if you discipline and teach your child to love God when they're old, they're going to remain good Baptist Christians. All right. But that's not what the verse says. The better Hebrew understanding is, or probably more literal translation is train up a child in his way. And when he's old, he won't depart from it. Okay. Or you could say in the way that's natural to him. What this means is know your children, know their strengths, know their weaknesses, train them up in the things that they do well, teach them how to be excellent at it. So we always say, if you love what you'll do, you'll never work a day in your life. Well, most kids today don't know what they love to do because they're not trained in anything that's natural to them. They think, oh, I'm going to do what my dad wants. My dad loves sports. I'm going to go for sports. We don't say, look, you're great at math. Let's hone in on that. Maybe you'll be an engineer. You're great at English. Maybe you'll go this way. You are good at sports, or you're good at music. You're good at painting. You have this natural inclination to problem solving. Let's build on that. So every tool in a toolbox has a purpose. Okay. I am not going to use a chop saw that is very limited in range and does that. It's designed, if my arm's a 2x4, it's designed to cut the 2x4 that way, right? I'm not going to use it for the same purpose that I would use a table saw or a jigsaw or a hammer, right? Children are given natural abilities by God, and it is our job to train them up as parents in that way so that when they're older, when they become adults and are contributing back to society, they can do what God designed them to do. And they will love it and they will work at it and they will honestly, they'll never work a day in their life because they love what they do and they'll excel at it. So, that said, my dad was, I think, very good at this. Um, he watched us kids, and whatever we were interested in, he got involved in it. If my older brother loves computers and dad got a computer, they worked on building one together. And today, my older brother is an IT technician and brilliant. I mean, he works at a nuclear power plant, just smart as can be. My sister was very hands-on, did I wouldn't say a natural caregiver, but I mean, she's the oldest sister and she did do caregiving. And, uh, but she's a nurse and she loves what she does as a nurse. And my dad encouraged her in that direction and what she did. Um, my little brother, very strong, very hands-on, very smart, wanted to kind of be a mechanic slash fireman. He has been a fireman for over 10 years now. And now he's actually transitioning into IT and going more the brain side of things. Um, I had a natural inclination toward music and music theory and instrumental playing. I now have a degree in audio engineering. I have worked on multiple films. I actually do work in church IT, but with that, I'm actually doing a lot in the media side. I'm doing a lot in teaching and preaching, and God is using all of these little things that my dad encouraged me in as a child that I had a natural inclination to. My dad built on those things, and now I'm using them, and I'm loving where I'm at. And honestly, I have the best job I've ever had in my life. And you can look back at the history of how my dad didn't force us into a mold. My dad never said, I want you to be an athlete. I think you've got a great shot at playing football. I'm short, I'm tiny. I'm not going to be a football player. All right. I'm not going to be a basketball player. That's what I played in school. I have no shot at the NBA. And my dad gave me no false pretenses to say, I think you got a shot at pro. There was no chance. And my dad wasn't going to let me believe that. Now, he encouraged me to be the best I could be. But he always said, I think this is where your strength is. And he never tried to push my little brother to have my strength. He never tried to push me to have my little brother's strength. He let us be the individuals that God made us to be. And today we are in very different fields. And honestly, um, we love it. We love what we do and the directions that we're all headed. And we're all in church. We all have good relationships with God. Um, I think my dad's a successful parent because he did listen to what that verse actually says. And as we head into this, I think it's important to contrast those two things because if you train your child up that way and you intentionally bring God into it and you talk about how God gave them this gift and the things that they love, God's directing their heart toward those things, you're going to find that God wants to use those, right? This should be more, you shouldn't have to carve a path for your child. It should be like teaching your child how a river runs. Rivers flow through the land and then yeah, they slowly erode rocks and things that are in their path, but they move through the land and snake and just flow. And that's what life can be like if we know our natural tendencies, our natural abilities, and the things that God has uh, naturally given us the ability to do and to love. So um, that's the actual understanding of train up a child. And if we want to have a biblical understanding and a biblical foundation for our parenting, we need to know what the Bible truly says. And it says that we need to allow our kids to be the individuals that they are and encourage them in the things that God has given them natural tendencies to do. That doesn't mean sin. I'm not talking about the sin nature and letting them just run around lying and stealing and all of that because those are natural, okay? I'm talking about the skill sets, talking about the healthy interests, the things that aren't sin. Let them explore. Let them have fun. Let them be children. And I think that's vital to having a good upbringing and giving our children a good upbringing. Anna, thoughts before we dive into some of these quotes?
I don't think so. I agree with all that you said, so I don't think I have anything more to add to that.
All right. All right. So we're going to dig into some quotes here. I don't have a page number on some of these. Some of these you did put them in there. Uh,
Yeah, there's some that have page numbers and some that don't.
okay. All of these quotes come from the book To Train Up a Child. Um, so I'm gonna read the first one and then I'll let you give your thoughts on this.
Okay, sounds good.
Everything a child experiences, either by way of indulgence or the self-restraint you impose, that seems kind of weird to call it self-restraint that you impose,
Hmm.
is preparing him for the day when he will mature into a responsible moral soul. Somewhere on that road of development, each child will graduate to commence his full accountability. That child then stands alone before God without excuse. It becomes his day of accountability.
That's a mouthful.
Hmm.
Um, I just feel like like a lot of what the Pearls say, especially in like this is their first book. So like a lot of it is like this sounds really good in theory, but also children like in theory would probably work that like be able to do that, but I'm like it doesn't feel like a real child though
Yeah.
because it's like the especially with the sounding like especially with it saying that we're imposing was it like restraint or something like that
Yeah, it said
in the child,
by way of indulgence or the self-restraint that you impose. So
which I feel
it
like is
doesn't,
just kind of like we're the parent, we impose that. Like the
right.
child doesn't have it already in them, so like we have to like put it on them, which I'm like I feel like as children we already have that. It's just more our parents are either not going to nurture it or going to nurture us having that self-control and self-restraint.
Well, and
So
the
it's kind of that
the
weird
thing is
thing.
self-restraint that you instill
Yeah.
and this is where, really breaking into the wording can dive into the psychology of the person, right?
Hmm.
My dad instilled in me a respect for my mom.
Yeah.
Okay. My dad did not impose that upon me.
Hmm.
My dad led by example. If I said something out of turn, he corrected me. If I continued to say something out of turn, then it got a little bit more. But I understood through his example and through his instruction, don't disrespect your mom. To impose something is, I don't want to say an imposition, but thinking of an injection and a forceful, like militarily demanding. Like I've had some friends go through boot camp and basic training, and what they'll say is they spend the first weeks breaking you down to nothing so that then they can build up what they want. That's imposing. By
Hmm.
that breaking down process, that's imposing. And this is the mindset. If and I have listened to interviews, I've heard him talk. This is the mindset that Michael Pearl has on how you handle children. This is not a not provoking your children to wrath, or I love the CSB says, don't exasperate your children. That's not what this is, and you're gonna see that when we talk about blanket training. It is exactly that. It's exasperating. Um, uh, Another quote they had: Parent, you can't blame your children if you have trained them to obey only after several warnings, threats, an ultimatum or two, and finally with a gesture of force. It's not their fault, it's yours. Here's the issue. He's kind of creating this false dichotomy. Just
Hmm.
because you give warnings doesn't mean your child won't listen to you. And just because you jump to a gesture of force doesn't mean your child will listen to you. I obeyed my dad more as a teenager because I didn't want to waste time getting lectured. Okay, that was my mindset. The force that came through discipline, or threat of a spanking, or whatever it may have been. I don't think I got spanked as a teenager, but whatever that threat of discipline was, had very little effect on my bearing and my
Hmm.
actions, right? Um, what he's doing doesn't line up. You do need to let your yes be yes and your no be no. That's biblical, okay? But jumping to a use of force is not the right way. You as a parent are to be prudent. And then this is all coming from Proverbs. You should be prudent. You should be discerning. So prudence is looking ahead. Discerning is understanding what's going on around. So my wife is much better at this than I am. There are times I am ready. I am tired from work. I want to snap and just turn the situation on. Like we're done. And my wife's like, hold on. What you didn't see, what you don't know is going on is this. Okay. Or, a reminder that, hey, she didn't nap well, right? Not my wife, my toddler didn't nap well. I'm thinking she's being a little tiny punk. My wife understands she only got 30-minute nap when she's used to a 2-hour nap, and so it is now an hour from bedtime and she's exhausted. That's going to change my response, because if I just start I don't do this, but if I just start beating a 2-year-old child who's exhausted, they don't understand what they did wrong, and they're not going to change. All they know is, oh, I'm screaming and daddy's hitting me. Okay, that's not training the child. You're training an outward behavior, but you're not training the heart, right? Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. What dwells within a man is what comes out. And if you don't guide the heart, it doesn't matter what the actions do. There's a wonderful show I highly endorse called Bluey. Have you seen Bluey?
I have.
I
I
love
really
it.
love Louis.
And there's this episode where Bandit, the dad, so it's this family of blue healers. It's animated. It's great for kids, great for teenagers, great for adults. I mean, it's just a wonderful show. Bandit decides he wants to teach his 4-year-old daughter, Bluey might have been 5 at this time, chess. And he starts playing, and of course, Bluey's losing, and Bingo's interrupting. And his wife comes up and goes, why do you want to teach them chess? Well, because smart people play chess. And she goes through this whole thing, and she goes, he's a good dad. And she says, um, and he looks at her and says, well, you're a good mom. And she goes, but a lousy chess player. And he goes, and I guess you turned out all right. And she says this to him: work on their hearts, the heads will come later. That's what we have to do as parents. We are given this natural bond with our children, that God puts this bond between parent and child, that we have this gem that is this pure, beautiful heart. And I don't stand for total depravity. I think it's absolutely crap. We're not going to get into that tonight. Um, and yes, there is sin in the world. And yes, this child is a sinner and is going to end up sinning at some point if they haven't already by the time we're dealing with things. But God gives you this heart and says, "Hey, you first and foremost, you're a steward of this heart. You don't own that child. Your job is to steward that child from infancy to adulthood and give them back to God to do with as He pleases. They're not yours for life. They're not yours to tell what to do and to manipulate their life decisions as adults. No, your job is to teach them how to go through life, and you have them for hopefully 18, 20-ish years. And then you say, God, whatever you want. And as a missions pastor, my dad heard parents say, I can't give my kids to God. What if He calls them to Africa? What if He calls them to Africa? What if God takes your child around the world and you see great things done through their ministry? Isn't that worth it? Isn't the gospel being spread and you getting to spend eternity with your children in heaven worth a few years of separation on this earth? Right? You become a self idol. You're putting your desires above God's, and you're taking possession of something that's not yours, it's His. He gave that child to you to raise for His honor. And by putting up this dichotomy that Michael does, he's saying you have to jump to force, you have to snap, you have to put them in their place every single time. You're supposed to raise little tiny soldiers. No, you're supposed to raise human beings who are created in the image of God, who have hearts and souls and desires and emotions. And if you squash all of these things, and you know what? God has given them a will. Your job is not to break that will. Your job is to mold that will into something that will pursue God. And it's a vastly different thing. And sometimes there is a fine line. Sometimes there are those who are very hard-headed and stubborn. And sometimes there are those who are the tenderest, sweetest children on the face of the earth. And if you go start beating them, they're going to end up little tiny narcissists because you have broken every bit of them, and all they know is hurt and pain and lack. And they're going to try to soak everything into themselves. And they're going to be so self-absorbed because they didn't receive what they needed. And we see this all the time in society. Or they may be on the complete flip end of the spectrum where uh, they're doing other things that we see statistically that I'm not going to get into because, again, um, I don't like saying certain words. I just don't. But it's not good. Any thoughts before we go into quote three?
Yeah, it's just that thing of like if you've trained them to obey after warnings, threats, an ultimatum or two, and then finally a gesture of force.
Now, I'll admit I am not in promotion of the warnings, threats, a warning or two, all of that, an ultimatum or two. Like I give my kids a chance. I give their lack of focus a chance, and then it's like, all right, you've been told, you've been warned. All right, now we got to deal with this. And it's
Yeah,
not always a spanking. Sometimes it's timeout. Sometimes it's a loss of toy. Sometimes it's all right, you know what? No TV, no
yeah.
Nintendo, no whatever. Um, Sometimes it is a spanking.
Mhm.
You know, I like I said, I fully believe in that. Um, but that's not my go-to
Hmm.
unless there's like blatant, straight up, you knew absolutely 100% this is not allowed,
Yeah,
you know. And even then, it's not my go-to. Uh,
yeah.
all right. There is nothing cute or lovable about a whining brat. I agree.
I
That
don't think
statement
anyone would disagree.
alone, to allow a child to whine and disobey is to mold a personality and character that you will eventually find hard to like. You know what? I sometimes don't like the personalities of my kids as they are. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, there's nothing molding about that. By taking control and teaching them to control their emotions and to instantly obey, your child will be cheerful and pleasant. No, they won't. Yes, by taking control of a situation, not of the child, control the situation and teaching them to control their emotions. Yes, teach them to control. Don't beat that control. You're not going to calm down an angry child by spanking them. You need to teach them how to process. And for some of us who weren't taught how to process, we've had to learn that so that we can teach our children that. Um, by by taking control and teaching them to control their emotions and to instantly obey, your children will be cheerful and pleasant. No, that's not how it works. That's just it's not. Um, I have circumstances that make me unhappy, and instantly obeying does not fix that. Controlling my reactions doesn't make me happy and cheerful.
Yeah.
I can put a fake smile on. It doesn't fix and make me actually happy. What it does is it gives peace to those around me, but it doesn't actually address the issues at hand. The child reciprocates the parent's delight by loving and honoring them even more. That, in general, is probably true. Um, but you can achieve that through positive reinforcement.
Hmm.
And that's the issue is most parents don't want to put in the work to be active in positive reinforcement. I
Yeah.
struggle with it. It's something I have to remind myself often to do. There are times I'm just like, you did what you're supposed to do. Why should I be thanking you for that? But no, that's part of training. Says, hey, you cleaned up the room. Good job. And also, you did it without being told. Thank you so much. That's amazing. Let's go play a game. Okay. My 6-year-old speaks in playtime. That's her love language. I
Yeah.
want to show her that I love her and I appreciate her. Turn off the phone, turn off the TV, play a game or play Mario together. She loves Mario, right?
Mhm.
Be with her. So we talked about consequences. What's the positive reinforcement? She did something good. She obeyed right away without complaint, without fail. Do something for her. You don't have to do it every single time. Don't get her used to that. Oh yeah, well, if I clean my room, I'm going to get a $50 reward. No, don't be
Mhm.
stupid. Okay.
Mhm.
Use common sense, but give a reward. Teach her that when you do right, there's benefits for it, and when you do wrong, that has to be fixed. And there are reasons that we have to correct wrong behavior. We don't want to create menaces to society, right? But I do agree. The child reciprocates the parent's delight by loving and honoring them even more. The more I pour positive reinforcement into my kids when they do the right things, the more they want to do those things. But when I rob them of that, they start acting out. And if I give them that negative attention, guess what? At least they're getting attention.
Mhm.
That's the mindset of the child. Um, they can both enjoy each other's company. The parents are rested and refreshed by spending time with their children. Yeah. Although, I mean, kids can be exhausting too, even when they're behaving.
Mhm.
So, uh,
Exactly.
but I think the important thing is one, positive reinforcement and teach your kids how to handle emotion. Don't
Yeah.
beat the emotion out of them. That's not right, and that's not godly. God gave us emotions to experience life. Life without there's a movie and I don't wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I did watch it called Equilibrium. And what they did is they found there was a great Third World War, and what they did is they set up this big government system and they made this injection that you take that squashes all emotion. They removed color, they removed art, they removed books, and what they had was a peaceful society. And everyone was obedient except for these few rebels that the police went out and if you were found experiencing emotion, it was a death sentence. And sure, they had a peaceful, quiet, everyone obeyed society, but it wasn't life. And in the end, that was kind of the plot twist is one of the enforcers gets experience he misses a dose and he experiences life and goes and overthrows the system. It was turned out really cool. But the point being, if you squash the emotion of your child, they're gonna go through life scared of feeling. They're gonna go through life expecting that anything they feel is bad. And you're going to lead them, honestly, into a form of Gnosticism because Gnosticism teaches that the physical itself is bad and you shouldn't have that and you shouldn't experience or desire that. All physical desires are bad, and that's foolish. God gave us physical desires for a reason. Now, we should bend those for the positive ways according to scripture, We should guide those feelings and not be controlled by them, but we have to teach our children how to do that. Thoughts?
Let's see here. It's just, let's see. It's just, I mean, it's again, it's the thing that, like, I'm like, yes, in theory, that's like a great thing that he's trying to say. And, like, I mean, some things I obviously very much disagree with, but it's just that thing of, like, of course, there's nothing cute or lovable about whining brat, but it's just
Yeah.
interesting because I'm like, I don't know. It's just that thing of, like,
It's how he deals
it's,
with the whining brat.
yes, but also,
Yeah.
um, yeah, so it's like it's just kind of hard because he a lot of times will say like to mold a personality or whatever. He'll like use these really positive words and then like
Sure.
almost in the same breath he'll also be like you need to
But
beat
you
your
mold them
children
by
into
whipping them.
submission and instantly obey you and your wife regardless of how they feel like
Yeah.
doing.
Yep.
So it's just like, which one do you actually believe, Michael?
Yeah.
Because it's like one of them is like, ooh, molding this human that like is this little tiny human who's trying to figure out the real world. And then also, well, also beat this child into doing exactly what you want him to do. So I'm like, which one is it? Because it's such a whiplash for me.
And here's where we're going to start to see the misuse of words and the changing of definitions. Parents should not wait until their children's behavior becomes unacceptable before they commence training, which would then actually be discipline. Training is not discipline. Discipline is the damage control part of training. So there he's actually speaking out of both sides of his mouth because he says discipline is not training, discipline is part of training. So it's like, is it part of training or is it training? Like what's going on here? Okay. Discipline is not that. Okay. Discipline is where we also get the same word disciple. Okay. Discipline is the teaching. It is the process. It is. Okay. Training is the activities involved in that. Um, whether they be positive training, negative trainings, which would probably be better called punishment. Okay. Um, Positive reinforcement is part of discipline. It's not necessarily part of training. Training is, hey, let's clean up the house. Okay. That can be a training exercise. Or let's narrow it down. Some people have big houses, some people have little houses. Let's clean up the living room. All right. That's a training exercise. That is a moment of training. Kind of like I think it was it Spider-Man where he keeps going, is this a test? Is this a test? I can't remember which one it was. What was that?
I think it
Anyway,
was. I don't remember which one it was, but I think I remember.
I feel like he keeps asking Iron Man, was that a test? All right. Anyway, so okay, so training is the exercise, okay? And then what you have is the discipline says, okay, my 6-year-old's getting distracted. I'm going to guide her back. How I go about that can be positive or negative. I can get on the floor and encourage. One thing that helped my daughter, right? My daughter is very scatterbrained. Is I would go around the room and I would put anything she needed to clean up in a singular big pile in the middle of the room. So then she had one job, get rid of the pile. She didn't have to find the toys. She knew go here, grab something, put it away. Come back, grab something, put it away. Okay. I made the training exercise doable for her tiny mind that's all she could focus on. Then, if she continued to deviate from the project, from the exercise, we may have to implement some discipline. But if she didn't, if she worked hard, I'd encourage her. And then, so one thing that we might do, if she decided she was just wanting to wander and be scatterbrained, is we put a timer up on the screen. Say, all right, you have this long. And if you don't, we're taking this toy and you don't get it for a week. 9 times out of 10, she beat the timer beyond the limit. Like, I mean, if it was a 20-minute timer, she did it in 10 minutes or 15 minutes. I mean, tons of time to spare. Why? She could look up and be like, okay, keep going, keep going. And she would oftentimes just do it herself. It was awesome. Um, so that's training. That's teaching them, hey, and there are times she'd be cleaning. She goes, Dad, could you make a pile? And I was like, why do I need to make a pile? If you know you work better with a pile, make a pile. Then teach her the next step as she matures in that exercise. Same thing with basketball. You don't give a 6-year-old a basketball and say, okay, go be a point guard. No, you have to teach them how to dribble, how to pass, how to shoot. You have to teach them the difference between a layup, a jump shot, a three-pointer, teach them the out of bounds lines. All of this is part of training. Okay. So just doing stuff in with intentionality, I would say, is probably a good definition of training. Um, an athlete trains before he competes. Animals, including wild ones, are conditioned to respond to the trainer's voice command. So my response to this whole quote, okay, so from earlier and then this last little bit that I missed, Michael's use of training is not what we are called to do in Scripture. He explains how to set up an intentional scenarios for your child to struggle in and then beat them for failing. This is abuse and not training. My dad, I mentioned this earlier, my dad trained me to use a jigsaw at the age of 11. He trained me through words, through clarity, by guiding my hands in what to do. He didn't like cut me with the blade first to show me how much it was going to hurt. He didn't tell me to touch a moving saw blade and then hit me with a paddle. Yes, athletes train. They do drills that teach them what to do and what not to do. To learn the right way to shoot a basketball, you practice shooting a ball. You don't tell them to stay away from soccer balls, right? So I don't know if you put the full quote in there. I think this is probably a good time to segue really fast into what blanket training is because we've talked about it. We've talked about some of these horrific methods that he has. So why don't you describe blanket training for us?
So from what I've read and what I've read from their books, and then they're also, I think their website has it. I don't know for sure. I know one of the Duggars talked about it in their books.
Mhm.
So what I understand with blanket training is it's for the younger children. So it's not like your kids' age, it's
It's
more
typically
infants. It's
crawlers.
it's crawlers. So yeah, it's infants and crawlers. So like that kind of age bracket, but they want you to put out a blanket, so like hence the blanket training. And so then they want you to, as a parent, so it's either mom or dad, like put a toy or whatever that child wants to play with, whether that even if it's like your car keys, because it's it makes noise, it's cool.
Something that they love.
Um, something they love, yeah. And so they want you to put that out of the reach of the child enough that they are like, ooh, let me explore this new cool toy that I haven't explored before. Or they have, but it's out of their reach. And so the pearls want that you then to either swat their hand or whatever if they're trying to reach for it. So they want the child to stay on the blanket because that will teach them either like obviously like it's them teaching that child how to obey from a very, very young age, but also setting up that child for failure because I'm
Yeah.
like, of course the child is going to go for
You're trying
that,
to teach an infant
those car keys,
how
for
to
instance. Like,
fight its natural instinct. You're trying to teach it, which really is just a survival instinct for most of it, right?
yeah,
And so you set it up there. You say, "Don't go get it,"
yeah,
or "Don't play with this," or whatever. And 9 times out of 10, one, you're telling them not to play with their toy, the thing
yeah.
that you
It's a
bought for
toy
them
that
to
they
play
want.
with, right? And you're not giving them a random curiosity like a cell phone or something like that. And then yeah, you either smack their hand when they reach for it, or I think you said at some point you pick them up and pop them on the butt, and then you put them
Yeah.
back in the middle of the blanket, and then you
And
sit there
then rinse
until
and
they go
repeat.
for it again. Yeah. And you continually do this, and I'm like, that's stupid.
It's so stupid.
And honestly, and that's why I say it's abusive. It really is. You're telling your child um something that you've typically within the example that he gives, something that you have given them that is theirs. That is something they use all the time, they play with. It could be a new toy, but the fact is it probably looks like it's an obvious toy generally, something that they
Hmm.
want, and you're setting them up to go do this, and he kind of I think likens this to the Garden of Eden, saying God put the tree there, then said don't have it.
Yeah.
First and foremost, you're not God. Okay. Second, God also gave them lots of other things to do. He didn't isolate them inside a fenced area and the only thing in there was the tree, and then he said stay away from it. He gave them the entire rest of the garden. He gave them the animals. He gave them a ton of other food and such. And then he said, don't do this one thing. You have all this other stuff, okay? A better way to do this is to put your kid in the living room, put one thing up on a shelf, give them the rest of their toys, and say, leave my book alone or leave my computer alone, play with your toys. That's the Garden of Eden scenario. So he compares this sometimes to the Garden of Eden, but it's not, it's a false equivalency. He's not actually doing a one for one because God gave them the whole rest of the garden with complete freedom. He just said, don't do this one thing.
And also the Garden of Eden illustration is that first of all, Adam and Eve were adults.
Yeah.
And also like they had each other and then also the animals also free reign of the garden, but also like he gave it kind of an age appropriate directions like,
Yeah.
hey, this is the tree.
Yeah.
You can't touch this. This is going to happen
Yeah.
if you do that.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought
But
up
he also didn't was
age
like,
appropriateness.
okay, here's a blanket.
Yeah.
Here's your like that one toy, and like yes, they like Adam and Eve got that consequence
Yeah.
after they disobeyed God, but also God was very clear of like,
Because the
no.
other thing that you're supposed to do that I think we forgot in blanket training is if they try to leave the blanket,
Mm.
you put them back, and I think you're supposed to spank them if they leave the blanket.
I think so. I think that's what I
Um,
remember
it's
understanding. That
so,
was
so
my
you're
understanding of
putting
it.
them to quote Star Trek, you're putting them in a Kobayashi Maru. It's a no-win scenario. The only thing they can do right is sit there and be bored. And I don't know if you've ever seen a toddler do that or an infant do that. It doesn't happen. They're going to wiggle and move, or they're just going to start crying. And then his
Which they
wife
probably
would
would.
spank him for that. So, um, all right. So yeah, that's blanket training, and that's why this teaching is so appalling, or one of the reasons. Next quote. As infants grow, they learn to manipulate their surroundings to their own gratification. A smile, grunt, kicking of the feet, rolling and shaking the head, crying and screaming all say, pick me up, feed me, look at me. Doesn't anyone realize I have urgent needs? What could be more important than me? First and foremost, a child has to be taught how to communicate, and it's up to us to learn how they communicate, respond to the needs, and teach them how to express themselves. This can be done incredibly effectively with positive reinforcement. But part of the reason little kids, especially infants and toddlers, do certain things is because we respond to it. Um, Example of a bad way to do it. My 6-year-old was just had a little bit of sass, and it was really cute when she was like 2.
Mhm.
She talked very clearly, and she had this little tiny bit, and my wife taught her how to pose and do this thing. I'm sassy, and we laughed it off. We thought it was adorable. Well, by the time she was 4, it wasn't so adorable, but we couldn't punish the behavior because we instilled the behavior.
Mhm.
And so what we had to work on it. She's a great kid. I love her to death. She is awesome, and she's my buddy. You know, she's great. She's awesome now, and she was still good then. It was a minor thing, but we can't punish them for things we instill. So if you're responding positively to negative behaviors, then yeah, your kids are going to do negative things. Um, but a lot of this too is simple communication. Infants thrive with physical touch. They did studies, and I'm not condoning the methods, but the study results were incredibly interesting, where they measured a child's health when they immediately went to skin time with the mother after birth, and then those who were immediately removed from the room.
Mhm.
And without fail, the children who received immediate skin time had better health, better color, better weight gain, all of these things, right? Children are bred and made, designed by God for contact with their parents, for the love, for the nurturing. And when they feel alone, they're going to be scared. They have spent their entire life literally touching their mother.
Mhm.
If they have any kind of memory or cognizant or training, they're used to warm. They're used to their food coming pretty much whenever they need it. They are used to comfort and peace. They're not used to the cold world that we live in. They're not used to being alone and not touching. They're used to hearing mom's voice every time she talks and the people around her. And it may sound weird, but children know. When oldest was my wife was pregnant with my first child, um, every night I sang the song "You'll Be in My Heart" from Tarzan to her belly. Okay. And we have a video of me exhausted and off key and pitchy as all get out singing it in the hospital the first time I held her. Beautiful moment. Well, fast forward, we get going to church, and our church had this kind of U-shape setup, right? And we sat off to one side, and my wife's holding Ava. She's got her head, and so my wife is looking at the stage, and my daughter's looking this way. And we sang this song as a trio, my pastor, our worship director, and I. And so the song starts off with my pastor sings a verse, and then we did the chorus, and then do this key change, and I sang the tenor. So then I did a solo. And Sarah told me after we sang this song, she said, the moment that I started my solo, my daughter's head went from here and went like that. She knew daddy's voice.
Hmm.
And I mean, she was weeks old. I mean,
Yeah.
we weren't even taking her to the nursery because of feedings and all that. Like, Sarah kept her in the auditorium. She's weeks old, and instantly she knew daddy's voice.
Yeah.
These are the things that bring comfort and peace. And to this day, if my 6-year-old wakes up from a bad dream or is hurt, I can sing "You'll Be in My Heart." And by the time I get done with the chorus, she's good to go.
Yeah.
It's honestly, it's kind of Pavlovian, but it's this sort
Hmm.
of beautiful, wonderful thing. But that's training. That's
Hmm.
positive reinforcement built in. What these infants are seeking is not to manipulate you. They're seeking safety. It's the same thing we're seeking when in our despair we cry out to a loving God and say, "Help me." It's the exact same. They're just communicating the way that they're able and know how. So I think it's important to understand that we teach them through our actions. You had a really good thought on this one.
Yeah, it just for me it's just hard because then it's just babies are just so innocent to me, and I'm like, how can you as a dad, like for like I think it was mostly Michael who wrote the book, I'm not sure, but I'm like as a dad, how can you look at your newborn 3 month old whatever baby and think immediately like they're trying to control me by crying? I'm like,
Yeah.
how can you think that way? Because I'm like, it doesn't, I'm like, even if that baby is screaming their little head off, I'm like, how else are they supposed to communicate with us?
Yeah.
Like they can't physically say, hey, by the way, I'm in pain.
Yeah.
I'm in, like, I need this, I need that. I'm like, how else are they really supposed to communicate? In his mind, I'm like, how else, Michael? Like, how else are you
Yeah.
expecting that? Because, like, for instance, when my son first started getting teeth, so he was in a lot of pain because it was his first teeth. And so you're like,
Yeah.
again, me and my husband were like, we had to like make sure we reminded each other, we're like, he is not trying to control us by crying like this. Like he's in pain, he needs Tylenol, whatever he needed. But it was like, that's not him controlling us by us reacting. Like we had to get the Tylenol, do all of that. But I'm like, how else was he supposed to communicate that his teeth were hurting? Because I'm like,
Yeah. He
if
has
we're in
no
the same
words.
position,
He
if
has no
we're
words.
hurting, and if I went to my husband and if I was hurting and I was crying and just in pain, and he'd be like, well, you're just trying to control me with that, we would feel invalidated. We would feel even worse because it's like, I'm clearly communicating that need, whether that's a hug, whether that's whatever, even when we can fully communicate, it's like, we're not trying to control our spouse. We're not
Yeah.
trying to control those people around us. There are some people who do, but it's like, we're not looking to control. So it's like for me, I'm like, then Michael, how else is a baby supposed to communicate with you?
Yep.
Like, are they supposed to have a full sentence of like,
Yeah.
Dad, I don't like the crib that you put me in. It's cold. It's away from you and mom.
Yeah.
Like, how else are they really supposed to communicate? They're little. Like,
I think it
so
was
I
Vodi
just for me,
Bakum.
it's like, how else?
I think it was
So it
Vodi
just makes
Bakum.
that
Yeah.
just makes me mad because I'm like, of course they're gonna try to like figure out their surroundings because that's the new surroundings that they don't know.
Yeah. I think
They
it was
haven't been in that surrounding yet.
think it was Vodi Bakum who said, God made children cute so you wouldn't kill them, and he made them little so they couldn't kill you. I'm
Yeah,
like, I don't think my children ever wanted to kill me.
yeah,
I've never gotten that from them. Ever. Not once. In their angriest moment did I think that they wanted me dead,
yeah,
or even thought themselves capable of doing that, or even knew what how to do that. Like that thought never crossed their mind, to my knowledge.
no. That would be very weird.
Yeah. All right. Due to the length of this interview, we're going to go ahead and actually put a pause here. Anna is doing an awesome job, and I'm so thankful to be able to have this conversation with her. But we are going to save the rest of this interview till next time. So, in the meantime, though, as always, we do want to hope and pray that if you've been affected by the teaching of Mike and Debbie Pearl, that you are finding healing, that you know that God loves you, that this is not what His Word teaches, and as you're going through your renovation, we do pray that the Lord will bless you and keep you, that he will cause his face to shine on you and be gracious unto you and give you peace.